things. But with that said, the direction from the board on working on the Pico HOV extension was such, and we believe we've complied with all the proper planning processes, et cetera, that we could be in construction on a project in 2025 or sooner if the normal process was applied. So we would be talking about construction of an HOV extension from Pico to the county line in 2025. And it doesn't always mean that the first thing you do is the best thing you do, but I would just note that the current study schedule as proposed by TCA and Cal Trans for the environmental clearance goes through 2025. So what we had been on a path of is trying to get improvements to the public in a time frame that is pretty close to us from an infrastructure standpoint. And assuming that although that HOV thing is, as Ryan indicated, is directly embedded in that, that's a decision point that is 6 years from us today. And we've been prepared to bring forward a full funding plan to the board on how to fund all the way through construction an HOV extension from Pico to the county line. So if we are sent through another process, which we don't fully agree is the right process, then that does delay potential improvements, obviously subject to board approval. So I wanted to make that timing issue clear as well.
Very good. Director Chamberlain, please.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I wanted to be clear that this board understands that the TCA-sponsored environmental document moving forward that will include the HOV component from Pico to county line is 100% paid for with non-taxpayers' money. So if OCTA were to be moving forward with an HOV project from Pico to county line, recognizing that they may be able to move forward a little bit more expeditiously than the TCA process, it's a smaller subset of alternatives to study, that would be fully funded by taxpayers' money. There is, in my opinion, inefficiency there when it comes to use of taxpayers' revenue to have TCA, a toll road agency, be paying for a study that may end up being part of the preferred alternative moving forward on I-5. I want to make sure that's noted. We do believe, from Cal Trans perspective, that looking at a holistic and more comprehensive set of alternatives for congestion relief in South Orange County is the most appropriate path forward. And with respect to the CEO, there are times when we just do not agree on the path forward. But I want to make a point that does not mean that Cal Trans and OCTA staff and TCA aren't talking on a regular basis about concerns and challenges that all the agencies have going forward, including commitments to taxpayers via them too. There were several comments made about conversions from high occupancy vehicle lanes to high occupancy toll lanes. I will be direct in telling this board that Cal Trans, as owner operator to the state highway system, has the legal authority to do a conversion from HOV to HOT, irrespective of what funds were put in to construct those very lanes. Would we do that without discussing that with OCTA and other parties? No. But there are reasons why, as owner operator, I'm making this very direct comment. We have HOV lanes in this county, all over this county, that are not moving and not providing an incentive above a general purpose lane as it turns out to mobility improvements or time savings. We have federal statutes that tell us we must get our HOV lane performance operated at 45 miles an hour or higher, or the federal government can sanction the state of California, meaning less transportation revenue going forward. They haven't done that in the past, but they can. We presented that to this board on the 4 or 5 discussions. When we convert from HOV to a high occupancy toll lane, it's important to note that we're not having that discussion and saying it is now 100% tolled. High occupancy toll lane means there is still an incentive for people to grab another party to hop in a car to ride in those lanes for free. Similar discussions we had on the 4 or 5. 2+ is free until it doesn't perform to a certain level, then the occupancy rate is raised. There is still an incentive for 3+ to be free in a toll lane. Okay? What we are doing is we are proposing to sell extra capacity when it's there, and we're proposing to continue to have those lanes operate where there's an incentive for people to grab somebody else in their car and move. So those are operational decisions that the Department of Transportation can make, and we will do that having discussions with OCTA and other transmission parties in this county. We have been on record with our managed lane network study presented that to this board, to other members of this county. We have recommendations on corridors that we intend to prioritize for HOV to HOT components. We've studied it. We're not doing it in a vacuum, and we did it where OCTA was part of that process. So hopefully I've addressed some of those questions, and again, be more than happy to have more dialogue with any of you that would like to do so.
Mr. Chamberlain, I guess my question would be is, I don't doubt what your charge is. My question would be is, if that's your view, why wouldn't you engage the regional planning agency with those things? In other words, do you then accept, if Stanton says we want to toll each boulevard because it's not moving right, do you entertain that project as well? Or do you turn to the regional planning agency and say, hey, we think this needs to be addressed, we ought to go address this problem?
To answer your question, we have reached out to OCTA. They were absolutely engaged in our managed lane network study, our managed lane feasibility study. We've presented to staff, so we have had that discussion. And to answer your question, if it's somebody wants to toll Beach Boulevard, that's quite a different animal. We would be engaging with that discussion with OCTA. But OCTA is a county transportation commission. They are acting as a regional transportation planning agency. We will engage with the county transportation commission as we always do. But I want to be clear that pricing is an avenue that the state of California is looking at to continue to move people, goods, and services more efficiently in our regions.
I don't think that's the concern. I think the concern is, with whom do you engage that, address that problem? That's where I think our problem is.
Understand. I think what I'm hearing is should we be having that discussion exclusively with OCTA? And I'll just take the liberty of answering my own question. The answer is we likely would have any entity that wanted to do or propose improvements on the state highway system. That includes adding lanes, be looking at HOV capacity, be looking at HOT capacity, both. I can guarantee you if OCTA was moving forward with an HOV lane on I-5 in South Orange County, the Department of Transportation would be asking for an alternative to be studied to look at HOT.
But I really appreciate this dialogue, by the way. I think I understand your need for a partner to address these issues, but I think when you go outside the regional planning agency, I think agencies like LAMTA, San Bernardino, and the other agencies is going to be very, very alarming to hear that they are now competing with what other agency in their area wants to do a project. I think that's going to be very alarming.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Johnson.
couple of quick thoughts. Mr. Chamberlain has mentioned OCTA a few times. I want to be clear, when I say OCTA, that's the board of directors. So although there may have been some staff level discussion from the Department of Transportation to our planning staff about the future of tolling in Orange County, you guys as a board of directors have not taken that up, other than to say in the long range transportation plan in the summer of 2018 that we see that as a future strategy, and you directed us to go look at options for that. We have planned for you a discussion of what we're calling a network phasing strategy in December of this year at your regional planning and highway committee and the board, and we will begin to lay out an open, public, transparent process about the opportunities for the future around pricing. We know that the system is having challenges, as Mr. Chamberlain accurately defined, but I think who gets to make that decision and how that decision is made, our job as a staff is to give you professional recommendations for your considerations with the pros and cons, and going through all of the challenges that you outlined and many of you know so well on the 405 project. We take that very seriously. So that is coming. We will incorporate in that discussion some of the thoughts that the Department of Transportation has come up with, but I think it's important that from my perspective, those are decisions that, particularly as it relates to Measure M2, sit with the board of directors and will make recommendations as appropriate on that. And then the last thing I'll say, if I could, I think when you mentioned, Mr. Chamberlain, no taxpayer dollars, I assume you're talking about no taxpayer dollars on the environmental process of the HOV, so that somebody would still have to pay for it. So,
well, if I can just respond to that, Mr. Johnson, as a developer and frankly as a conservative and a real estate developer, I did a project in Santa Ana about 15 years ago, and I paid over $7 a square foot in taxes to TCA. So, yeah, it is taxpayers' dollars in my views.
Dr. Chamberlain, did you have any more comments, or were you? I didn't know if we cut you off in that.
No,
I just want to give you.
my final comment is that the California Department of Transportation absolutely does planning for the state highway system, just like the RTPA and the County Transportation Commissions do. So when you say there's one planning agency, there is the California Department of Transportation, there is OCTA, cities do their own planning as well. It is not only one entity gets to do it.
Cities do exclusive, I guess this is why.
That's my final
Cities deal exclusively with cities. I think the mandate of OCTA is to deal with the region. And I think if Anaheim started planning for Orange or Santa Ana, we would have the same type of conflict, which is why I think Mr. Johnson needs to elevate the discussion and find clarity for us.
So can I be clear on our next steps here? I know this item here is a receive and file. It's nothing, no action to be taken, but I guess so. We had talked about just maybe clarifying with I don't know if it's Secretary Kim and the state on delineating roles and responsibilities if that's needed, and obviously working with Mr. Craven. Thank you for being here, and TCA folks. And got it. Yeah, okay. So sorry, Director Hernandez, please.
Yeah, very interesting discussion, and I appreciate that. I heard a couple of things. So HOVs are less efficient than HOTs. Apparently, they move traffic more. At least that's what our director said. Is that accurate?
Director Hernandez, we would agree with that, generally speaking, but context matters. So the 91 Express Lanes is essentially an HOT. It depends on where it's at, where it's needed, what it is, and I think that's part of the planning process. So I don't think it's a blanket statement, but it can be in a very urban area.
And I think the other comment I heard was that the overall authority actually is Cal Trans in the state, and they could do without actually any input, I guess, is what I heard. Which basically, though, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And the challenge for us at our level, as electeds in Orange County, in particular our cities, we look to not only move traffic efficiently, but to save our taxpayers dollars. And if there's a way we can do that, I guess that's where I see the struggle coming in between HOTs and HOVs, is that our taxpayers already pay for these highways. And then when we put an HOT on top of it, they're paying more. And it's like, okay, our job locally, and Cal Trans has the state, I get it. I don't. I'm only worried about Orange County and my city, our taxpayers. So that sometimes becomes a philosophical rub, I guess. And I'd like to see us deal with that. But in either case, I appreciate the dialogue. At least we're talking about it.
And Director Hernandez, I think you're correct. The State Department of Transportation has a lot of authority, and we respect that. I think the concern is we have, under our $13.4 billion sales tax forecast, 43% is supposed to go to highway projects. So the question is, do we want to continue to invest the $4 billion into the highway system if it's not generating the type of improvement that we promised the voters? That's probably the bigger question. We recognize the responsibility and authority of the DOT.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And Director Wagner.
Yeah, I do want to push back a little bit on the idea that it is no tax dollars at work. I mean, it may be state tax dollars, but there's still tax dollars. It may be that it's paid by fees that, developer fees or something, for example, and those always end up getting reflected in the ultimate cost of the project paid for by the taxpayer. It may be, in the case of toll roads, you're paying toll fees, but those are still our taxpayers. Those are still public dollars that are being spent. So when government is involved, ultimately the citizen is going to pay. And the idea, we don't have to worry about it or take it as seriously or otherwise be as concerned, because it's not tax dollars at work, I think misconstrues the way financing gets done at all levels of government. The other thing I would like to say to bring this full circle is I appreciate Director Chamberlain laying down some very clear markers here, which to my mind highlighted exactly what started this conversation, and that was Director Mueller suggesting that there need be closer cooperation at all levels between the Orange County transportation folks, TCA, OCTA, obviously, because Director Chamberlain has made it clear where the ultimate authority lies, and it, I think, is incumbent upon us to make sure we are all on the same page as we go up against the state, which, having spent 6 years up there and being intimately familiar with their planning process and the way they do business, it behooves us to be on that same page here, pushing back against a larger and not entirely responsive bureaucracy.
Thank you, Director Wagner. So, Mr. Johnson, when will we be seeing this item again at the board, or what's the next step?
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could maybe ask Mr. Brocky to go to slide 10 just to throw the dates on there again. Obviously this is very challenging, but we do want to continue to work with all the parties. I appreciate what was said by Directors Wagner and Miller in particular. We do want to communicate more formally, or continue to communicate formally to the TCA and Cal Trans on the concerns around Measure M. The scoping process is happening now, November through December. And I would like to acknowledge Mr. Craman's comments. He has agreed, and there's a letter in your package that says that any type of projects on the I-5 would be in coordination and approval with OCTA and Cal Trans. And again, reiterating, when I say OCTA approval, I mean the Board of Directors approval. I think that's very important. And then we would continue to monitor the activities. I would suggest that probably once the scoping period is done in the first quarter or so of 2020, we would feel compelled to provide an update to the Regional Planning and Highway Committee and the board about the status of that process. I'm hopeful that through that scoping process, we can work collectively and collaboratively to define, refine, and be very much more focused on what we're all trying to deliver in terms of transportation congestion relief. And then finally, if the board agrees with that, I'll work to set up some type of conversation and briefing with Secretary Kim as well as the new Cal Trans director, and coordinate with the appropriate board members as appropriate.
Very good. Thank you.